Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name's Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. How's it going tonight?
I'm doing excellent, sir. Man, do we have a fun, exciting, very real-world show, right? It's one of the things that we've been getting feedback on and people have seemed to really appreciate is vulnerability. Hey, here's what's working, but also here's what's not working and what we're struggling with. And people seem to enjoy hearing that. And so as those stories evolve, we're going to share them.
Yeah, especially me, right?
You're a problem child. Joining us for a special appearance, it is Eric Hendricks. You may know him as Eric the IT guy. He works for Red Hat. He's a Red Hat technical marketer and the host, or one of the hosts for the Fedora podcast. Eric, welcome in.
Well, hello, Noah. Happy to be back.
I know it's been a couple of hours and we're back in the same place. I appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, good to be here. In fact, I think it was episode 7 or something of the Ask Noah show. I was actually on talking about open source DMX lighting. So we go way back, the Ask Noah show and me.
Yeah, and DMX lighting has come a nice long way. That might be a good thing to circle back at some point. So I want to start here, Steve. You ran into a unique problem in Home Assistant that was orphaned entities. So start by telling me what an entity is in Home Assistant. Pretend that I'm a 5-year-old who's never set Home Assistant up before, but I got a Raspberry Pi for Christmas and I flashed Home Assistant onto an SD card and I connected it to my network and now I've started adding devices. What are entities? How would I see them? And when does it become problematic or cluttered?
So an entity can be thought of as kind of like an attribute of a device. So for example, if you have a little contact sensor that's made by some company, oftentimes they will have an entity on that sensor that is the heat of the actual sensor. And so when you adopt the sensor into your Home Assistant, you have the thing you care about, which is probably a binary input, which tells it whether the door is open or not. But you might have additional things like the battery level and the temperature of the thing. And some of them even measure whether they're upside down or not, or whether the battery back has been opened, because that's a sign of being tampered with. So all of these things are attributes of that sensor that you've just purchased, like put into Home Assistant. And those come through as individual entities. So what can happen is if you end up having a device that dies and you remove it from your Z-Wave or your Zigbee network or whatever, sometimes it doesn't get cleaned up properly. So you end up having orphaned entities because you go into Home Assistant and you think, oh, well, I've removed the device itself, so it should be all good. The device is gone, but the individual entities, for whatever reason, don't get removed. Then you have a bunch of orphans. And this is just extra things for Home Assistant to keep track of, because it has like a database of all of the things, and for every entity it has some level of state that it tries to track at a regular interval. So even if the sensor and the entity is not available, it's still trying to check that state to record it.
So you had a series of entities that had become, well, it kind of cluttered up your system. Now you started on the path of trying to clean that up one by one, and very quickly pivoted paths because it was becoming arduous and very time intensive. Can you tell us a story of how that happened and what tool you landed on to fix it?
Yeah. So one of the challenges that occurs is if you have something plugged into Home Assistant that monitors your network for devices, each device will also have some level of entities to it. So for example, if it's a phone, it has a name, it has a MAC address, it's got an IP. When our in-laws come down once a year, their stuff joins the network and then disappears for months at a time. And all of those can become orphaned entities because the phone disappears, and eventually the network thing may clean that up, but some of the entities don't disappear. So I ended up looking at, I have a ton of unavailable or unknown entities. By a ton, I had over 1,000 of them. And so I was manually going in, like, clicking on this one, is this actually attached to something? And I was doing that kind of manual process of trying to identify what was happening. And then I was like, nah, I'm going to write a script. And so I went to thinking like, well, how do I write the script? And I started searching around. I came across this tool called Spook. And this is the kind of the PSA, the long-winded way of saying people should go look at this plugin for Spook. So Spook is a third-party add-on for Home Assistant, and it describes itself as, I had this pulled up. Where is it? It describes itself as the scary, powerful toolbox for Home Assistant. And it once you've installed it and rebooted the system, it installs a bunch of additional functionality to it. One of the things that it has is this ability to go and delete any orphaned entities, which is what I wanted. So I haven't used any of the other built-in functions other than that one actively. So it went through and it pruned my over 1,000 down to about 200. And I can live with that because those are in various states of flux for various reasons. But I noticed a big improvement in just Home Assistant in general felt snappier. But in addition to that, it also kind of in the background and scans your Home Assistant for issues. And so I have some integrations for Roomba and stuff like that were custom integrations. And it identified that there were some undefined variables and this was causing problems. And it basically, every time I cleared an issue, it would put another one back. So in Home Assistant, there's a little section where the Home Assistant core team will tell you, hey, this is deprecated, or you've got a typo here. Like there's a notification area of areas of interest in your cluster, or cluster is not the right term unless you're going big, but in your instance. And Spook identifies itself as, hey, Spook found this, so that you know which was done by Spook and which was done by the Home Assistant core. And I found that really useful because there was a bunch of cleanup that I needed to do for stuff that I had written. And so that was causing problems because every once in a while I have, for example, I made a giant sensor that takes all of the power consumption in the house and puts it into one sensor that's called, house power draw. The problem is every once in a while, if it polls and the device doesn't immediately respond, that causes an error because now all of the definition gets broken because something is undefined. And that was causing a bunch of problems. So Spook surfaced that to me, and it's just been very useful to clean up issues that I wasn't even realizing that I had.
So now that you got everything cleaned up, are you going to get rid of it, or are you going to hang on to it? And if so, why do you want to hang on to it?
Well, first of all, there's no particular reason to get rid of it, but I'm going to hang on to it because it's probably just going to run in the background and kind of sniff for problems that might occur, because you never know what it's going to surface for you. So I trust this add-on because if anybody's been integrated into the Home Assistant community, you're familiar with Frank. He's a prolific author of software for Home Assistant, and he has a high level of trust, and he is on one of the maintainer lists for this for Spook. And so I have high level of confidence in this is not going to do the wrong thing.
Eric, are you has the Home Assistant bug bitten you at all? Is that kind of?
It hasn't, but this is something I've been wanting to dive into, and now that we've spent the last couple of years upgrading our home network and our internal Wi-Fi infrastructure, home automation was one of the next things. So thank you, Steve, for finding and fixing that issue before I even knew I had it.
Well, good luck to you. It's a long, fun rabbit hole to fall down.
Here's what I would tell you. Prepare to get nothing
very
done.
Expensive, too. Right.
It can be.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. I think if you'd have said 10 years ago, I would have said, yeah, it can be expensive. But Steve, you found ways to automate stuff for, no word of a lie, less than $20.
Yeah, I mean, some of it I make my own sensors for. In fact, I would say the most reliable sensors, although the most ugly ones, are the ones that I made myself, because they are literally like circuit boards that I connected, that I know what they do. And absent power issues, they just don't fail. They just keep going. So absolutely, you can also scour for deals if you are so inclined. If you don't need them immediately, like I picked up Z-Wave contact sensors on Black Friday last year, where I bought 4 of them for $20. So, you can hunt around for deals, and they just sit in the closet waiting to be used as replacements for things as they fail, or new projects as they come up.
You have to let us know how your Home Assistant adventure unfolds, Eric. I'd love to stay in the loop on that. So
yeah, I'll have to get started and report back.
Absolutely. So Steve, the other adventure that you embarked down is comparing and contrasting various different browsers. Now, this is something that can be kind of frustrating for a lot of people, because you get your browser, you get set up, you have your bookmarks, you got your extensions, you get everything dialed in, and then every once in a while, one thing doesn't work on one browser and one thing doesn't work on the other browser. So for example, my go-to is anytime I do something with Restream.io, it almost always, Eric, back me up here, almost always will fail if you try to do it inside of Firefox. It's like 1 out of 8 times it'll work, and then the other 7 times it's going to fail. And so I've just learned, if I'm doing something with Restream, do it in Chrome. You had kind of the opposite problem this week. Tell me about it.
So I guess this is more a question for the audience. I'm working in an environment where I need to use the proxy. I've been given an Ubuntu environment, so I set the proxy in Network Manager, which is how the company has issued Ubuntu. So it's not using NetPlan. They have configured it for Network Manager. I've also set it in the bash RC so that the command line utilities use the proxy. In addition to, I also tinkered around with dconf, because there are proxy settings in dconf. When I use Chrome, everything works immediately. If you look at the Chrome settings, the Chrome just says, hey, I'm using the system proxy settings. And if you click on that, it just simply opens up Network Manager where the proxy settings are configured. When you use Firefox, it goes nowhere. Like, it doesn't error. It just bounces forever. You know how it, like, along the bar, it bounces back and forth when it's trying to load a page. It just bounces forever. It never actually bails. And I've tried setting the system proxy in Firefox. I've tried setting a manual proxy in Firefox. I've tried setting the manual proxy with username and password, like you would if you were doing curl. I've tried tinkering around in the about config. I suppose the short of it is, if it was in the first hour of searching on choose your search engine of choice, I probably did it to try and fix this problem. I cannot get Firefox to work with the proxy, like, full stop. I don't know what's going on. I figure that somebody out there has worked with a proxy that requires authentication. I suspect that the issue is, when I use Chrome, it pops up a dialog prompting me for the username and password for the proxy. This doesn't happen in Firefox. I suspect that is what the problem is. I just can't find the fix for it. So if you've used Firefox with an authenticated proxy, I would love to hear from you and attempt whatever it is you did to fix it.
So it's interesting you bring this up. I don't know that this is related, but I want to share something with you. So earlier this week, I work with an organization that does a lot with Macs. And one of their lead technical people upgraded his laptop to the latest version of Mac OS. And after he did so, a couple of things broke. So the first thing that broke was C-File, the client, stopped working. Now, couple of bits of information. The C-File server is local, on-site, on the local LAN, but does not have a public cert. So it doesn't have a Let's Encrypt. It doesn't have a like a VeriSign thing. And the reason for that is it doesn't have a public IP. So I can't do reverse DNS. I can't get. So I've got that as a problem. But then secondly, the other thing that we noticed is that when he tries to open Cockpit, that's running on atop a Red Hat box with that's running a virtual host, he can't get to the web UI. The box responds to pings. It will work if you open Safari, but inside of Chrome, when he tries to go to https:// IP address :9090, nothing. It's like it just doesn't exist, doesn't even respond. And Eric, you were telling me that it might have to do with a new security feature in macOS called Gatekeeper. You struggled with this a little bit. Tell me about it and its impetus to open source apps.
So, in fact, my most recent battle with Gatekeeper was about an hour ago, trying to get into the Mumble Room for this show. With the latest version of macOS, and I think this is probably true on the iPad and iOS apps as well, there is a security feature called Gatekeeper, which is kind of reminiscent of some of the security features in Windows, where it'll say, this isn't signed by our official store, so therefore it must be garbage. Therefore, unless you jump through these 6 hoops, I refuse to open. So under the system preferences, privacy settings, there's an option to allow a particular application. This has impacted pretty much all of my open source apps that I run on top of a MacBook Pro. And about the only thing I found is to go in every time you open that app for the first time post update and reapprove that application. It's incredibly painful. And what I've noticed is anytime the app or the OS now update, you have to go in and re-authenticate that application with Gatekeeper.
Interesting. Sounds like a royal pain in the neck. So if you have an idea, either for Steve's proxy question, or if any fruity people out there have some advice for me as to how I might restore the ability to get to the C file server and or get the C file client to work, would you please let me know? One of the things that I'll add, just that doesn't make any sense to me, the tech guy is able to get on his home LAN to Proxmox, which is of note because Proxmox is also using a self-signed cert. And so things that have public certs seem to work just fine. Self-signed certs that are working at this organization are not working for reasons unbeknownst to me, but self-signed certs are working elsewhere, which leaves me holistically confused. So if you have the answer to that, or if you have an answer to Steve's Firefox proxy thing, we'd like to know. Just out of curiosity, Steve, could you give us a 30-second elevator pitch on what an authenticated proxy is and why you were using it?
So an authenticated proxy, well, a proxy just in general is something that is your traffic has to go through in order to get out. And the purpose of this is so that they can make sure that the organization can make sure that you're not doing anything bad. In addition to that, you can use a proxy like Squid, for example, to do cachings so as to reduce the amount of load that your internet pipe has. So it will essentially cache various objects. And then when you go to a website that says, I have cat.gif, and it's the same as the previous person who looked that up, instead of pulling that off the internet, it just serves it to you. So you can use proxies as a cache. You can use them to do things like filter content, or just simply to monitor content so that, you're not spending too much time on YouTube or whatever it is at work. Authenticated proxy just means the proxy requires you to have a username and password in order to even access it.
Okay. So it's a thing that you place in front of a thing to get to that requires authentication.
Yeah, like I said, its whole purpose is to make sure that you're not doing something bad. So it prevents you from getting an unfiltered pipe to the internet so that they can make sure that A, if you have access, they're tracking it, or B, you're allowed to have access to everything, but they're just doing some sort of filtering for it. And so the authentication is just, if you hop on my network, you might be able to get to my network, but I don't necessarily want you to get out. So for example, maybe your laptop has to be on the same VLAN as the server, and the server should not be able to get out to Docker. But as a developer laptop, you get out to Docker Hub to tinker around. In order to do that, you would put a proxy in front of there and say the proxy would know The server is trying to authenticate. You can't go to Docker. Oh, Steve's laptop is? Well, you can go to Docker. And so a proxy can help with that too.
Very good. Are both of you ready to get into some feedback and see if we can answer some other questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Our first email comes in from Michael. Michael writes in and says, "Hey, Noah, Steve, and Eric, you switched me to Linux at scale. I've since bought a System 76 Gazelle and never looked back. I used Threema for messaging. The user controls, private key, and it runs on Linux, macOS, iOS, and Android. But only 3 of my friends would install it. I basically quit communicating with the other 7 or 8. I would never install WhatsApp because Zuckerberg's involved. Thanks, Michael." So let's start here. So the first thing I feel the need to point out, and I'm saying this kind of in jest, little bit in jest, but also kind of serious. So if nothing else, the one thing I think we struggle with, and that I'm going to push back on this show at least, the technology is the tool to facilitate the human relationship. The human relationship is not the tool or the product of the technical thing, right? So I want to back that out. If I started with 11 friends and I couldn't talk to 8 of them, 72% of my friends have fallen, 73%, I guess, if you're rounding up, have fallen outside of the scope to where I can communicate with them. And so I would encourage you to reevaluate your approach. If using Threema means that you're not going to talk to 8 of your friends, I don't know that I would do that. But I took a look at Threema. Steve took a look at Threema. Effectively, the elevator pitch is it is a pay-for app that is decentralized and allows and is specifically designed for private communication. So, Steve, I know that you are especially when it comes to communication, you're very much a Walmart-style user. It's just whatever the tool is that gets the job done. So you're maybe in a way better, less, what would you say, biased position to evaluate a messenger. What did you think of Threema?
I actually was really interested in this. The trouble here is going to be the network effect. So Threema checked a ton of my boxes. Like it just sounded really good to me. It's open source. They do regular auditing. They have end-to-end encryption for voice, video, and group video. Yes, I can talk. Not like I do this for a living. On top of like loads of other things. Like it all sounded really good. The problem is it's really hard to get people to switch messengers when they're free. And this one has a cost. It's small, but it does have a cost to begin with. Right. And so you can pay cash, you can, pay anonymously. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do to pay for this in order to protect your privacy. That all is really appealing. But like, I probably could convince my wife because I would just pay for it and say, here it is. Let me put this on your phone. Mm-hmm. And that's where it would stop. Right. The social circle is not going to spread to her family or my family. It's just not going to happen. So very cool app, not network switchable. That makes sense to me. Now, Eric, you went one step further. You actually got an invitation to this app. You downloaded it. You installed it. You talked to a person. What'd you think?
So yes, I can kind of relate to our piece of feedback today because I got an invite probably about 2 years ago to Threema. It was invite only at the time, and I already use a tool called Ferdium to keep all of my communication apps together, from Telegram to Discord to Matrix, and so this was just another one to throw on the pile. Like Steve said, it had a few nice things like being fully open source, being open to audit, but the network effect just wasn't there. I mean, the UI is nice, but you could have the nicest UI and the slickest security, but if there's no one there that you know to talk to, then it's kind of a problem.
So you used it for a little bit. Ultimately, what brought you out of Threema and back to whatever it is you're primarily using?
I'm primarily using text messaging, Discord, Element, Slack.
Okay, so you get the mixture of
All of them.
Yeah, all of them.
So yes, all of them. But yeah, it was really just the network effect. There's just not a lot of people, and like Steve said, I could drag my wife onto it. She would go kicking and screaming after I had more or less abandoned Telegram, but trying to get groups of family, trying to get coworkers, trying to get networks of IT open source nerds onto Threema, it just wouldn't be worth it.
So Threema, very good. We think it's a very privacy-respecting, decentralized. It checks all the boxes. It's really just network effect. Now, let me ask you guys this. I took a look. Now, I admit up front that I'm biased here, but I took a look and I was able to find a project on the GitHubs called 3Matrix. 3Matrix is a work in progress, but it's a messenger bridge designed to bridge Threema and Matrix. Problem is, it was last updated 2 years ago. So as anybody who has tried to bridge anything has learned, if it's an actively maintained bridge and you've got participation on both sides, bridge works really well. Signal bridge, excellent. The Telegram bridge, direct Telegram bridge, excellent. Once you start having bridging services that are either unmaintained, the GroupMe bridge, once you have bridging services that rely on one central server that try to bridge all of the things, the T2bot stuff, bridging falls apart rather quickly, and bridging in communication when it falls apart really is terrible. It's particularly egregious because you don't really know that it's failed. And so you're either missing communication traffic and you don't know that you're missing communication traffic, or you think that the other person you're talking to is ignoring you, that they're not receiving it. And when in reality, the bridge is broken. And so I'm curious if either of you see 3Matrix and say, yeah, that could be an interesting way to reach the people that are on Threema, or if it's, well, of the esoteric bridges, this is maybe top of the cake. And so, no, I don't think this is necessarily going to fix anything. If it works at all, it wouldn't be reliable.
Well, I mean, all you've done is taken the network effect and said, hey, this thing that nobody other uses can connect to this other thing that nobody ever uses, and I can't switch anybody to either of them.
I would really like to be triggered right now, but unfortunately, you're absolutely right. About the time that the Matrix IRC bridge fell apart was about the time that Matrix use on my part started to decline. In fact, I still have my old CentOS Linux 7 virtual machine here at the house that has my old Matrix server installed. And I've been putting off fixing it, but all the bridges that I would use are just in various states of disrepair. So what we need is yet another messaging platform that we can all migrate to. That way, instead of having 14 different messaging platforms to keep track of, then we can have 15. That'll fix this.
I want to introduce you to my favorite comic, XKC. Never mind. No, your both of your points are well taken. I guess here's kind of been my approach, and has been my approach for about the last 2-3 years, and Threema has done nothing to dissuade me from this position. I've stuck my feet in the sand in Matrix, in part because regardless of what the rest of the world does, at least I can maintain mine. And so I put my family on it. I set them all up. I got everybody accounts, and I have it has so far, it has served me pretty well insofar as EMS discontinues their hosting service. It wasn't a problem. I picked up my existing server, moved it over to my own infrastructure, spun it back up. The people that were using it weren't even aware that I had done that. They're able to communicate with everybody else on Matrix. And then I've been using bridging to try to reach back out, get the feelers back out to all of the people that are on the Facebooks and the WhatsApps and the LinkedIns and the whatever else. Largely, I think what's going to be the end all be all messaging is going to be people are never, ever, 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 ever going to leave their network group. So if you're on Facebook, you're going to stay there. If you're on Instagram, you're going to stay there. If you're in GroupMe, you're going to stay there. But what I think is going to potentially come upon us in the next maybe 5 to 7 years, you're going to start seeing not in any small part driven from the GPDR and the EU and the Synterop standards that they require. I think over time, what we're going to see is messaging services that can communicate with each other, and messaging services that are going to pop up that are going to try to pull all of these places or all of these things into one place. So Matrix is just one of the things that are doing that, but Autonomous they had another platform before they invested in Matrix that could do something similar. And so I think you're going to see a lot of those competitors come up. I'm kind of resigned to the fact that my friends in the EU tell me that they won't text, or that texting is a bygone era. Nobody does that. My friends in the US, that's the only way they really want to communicate. And meanwhile, everybody else has picked their siloed platform that they've joined. And so I've sunk my teeth into Matrix, and then I've tried to reach back out with bridges. And I would say that my experience is the ones that are Class A bridges, the Slack, Discord, Telegram, Signal, those are excellent. Everything, most of it bridges to a lot of things. But Eric, to your point, unless you're hosting the IRC bridge, anytime we've tried to do one big public thing, and that would be true of T2Bot with the Telegram bridge, it's absolutely true with the Libera chat, it falls apart, and it falls apart quite catastrophically. And so I don't know that there's a real future in that publicly hosted kind of thing. However, the thing that causes me to challenge that assertion, Beeper. Right? So Beeper has made decisions that I think all of us disagree with. Steve, your latest one was they required you to switch over to using a Google product to bridge the thing that you were trying to get away from Google to begin with, which is egregious. But in the end, it's a very easy service that somebody can sign up for and then try to pull all of the things together. So it's interesting. I this guy writes in about Threema, but we've had people write in about various different other messaging apps. So it seems like every few months there's a different one that comes up. A Simplex has come up in the program a few times. So there's a number of different messaging apps, and there's a number of different communication platforms that are out there. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out long term, or at least I think so. All right. 2bit in the chat room. You can join us at #geeklab:/linuxdelta.com says, I have a portable 7-inch touchscreen monitor. When I use it as an extended display, Linux gets confused. It doesn't recognize where the touch location is and acts like the touch was on my main monitor, which is not a touchscreen. This happens on both KDE and GNOME. Is there a way to get touch events over to the correct screen? So Steve, I'll start with you. Do you have a 7-inch touchscreen, or do you have experience with touchscreens? And what do you think 2bit's problem is?
So yes, I do have a 7-inch. I kind of use it like my little crash cart. So I just kind of drag it around for, for pfSense or whatever that needs a crash carty thing. I have observed the exact same thing, and I suspect it's related to the fact that the 7-inch device thinks that it should always be the primary display. And so it has been my observation that if I make it the primary display, then the touchscreen works appropriately.
Okay. So to break that apart a little bit. So basically, as he plugs in his touchscreen, what ends up happening is the touchscreen presents itself in two different ways. The first way is it presents itself as a display device coming out of the HDMI port, and so it displays stuff. The second cable is likely a USB cable of sorts, which imitates a mouse, a pointer device. And so when you touch on the screen, it's saying X this, Y that, touch there. But because the primary screen is his non-touch display, it's touching where he's not touching. And so what you're suggesting is if he were to make the touchscreen his primary display and the main display his secondary display, it might allow for the opportunity to touch at a specific place. Now the touch correlates to the XY pattern of the primary display. He's able to trigger the thing. And then you've got the rest of it spilling over to the second display if it was concerning to him that, hey, I don't have my little activities menu or something like that. In GNOME and in KDE, it's possible to display those things on all of the displays. Is that roughly accurate?
If I could show the listeners a clapping emote, I would be.
Nailed it. Okay, so the answer might be try changing your primary display and see if that alleviates your issue. Let me ask you this, just because you brought it up as a crash cart. Do you have a recommendation for, hey, this is what I use for my crash cart because it's super small, super easy, has all the connectors I need? One of the things that I have struggled with for years is, okay, I go to this place and I go to take the crash cart or the crash equipment in our case, and I try to go use it, and what ends up happening or what ends up biting me is that the places that have these things have some super ancient connection. It's a VGA thing here. And then I go to another client and that one's DVI. And then I go to someplace else and it's HDMI. And I go someplace else. So it's like, it's all over the place, right? And so I've struggled to find a monitor or a kit that I can know that I'm going to show up to any particular CPU or any computer and be able to plug into it. Have you struggled with that, or mostly you're like, nah, if it's older than HDMI, it's not for me?
No, I mean, I have an HDMI to VGA adapter, so
wow,
it's
Steve.
a thing. It exists.
Well, that makes me feel silly now. Why didn't I think of that?
I don't know. You didn't ask.
It's a good answer.
You know what you should do? You should write in to Ask Noah.
I'm going to do that.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of December 15th, 2024, here's the Linux and open source news. The GNOME team has announced the release of GNOME 46.7. The KDE team has announced the release of KDE Frameworks 6.9. They also announced that KDE Gear 24.12 is out. Version 4.20 of the XFCE desktop environment has been released. QEMU 9.2 is now available. And in distro news, Red Hat has announced that CentOS Stream 10 is now available. Kali Linux 2024.4 has been released with 14 new tools. Fedora Asahi Remix 41 has been released. In open source security news, a new Linux rootkit malware called PumaKit has been discovered that uses stealth and advanced privilege escalation techniques to hide its presence on systems. And Sonatype's 2024 open source malware threat report reveals that open source malware is up 200% since 2023. The total number of malicious packages has surpassed 778,000 since tracking began in 2019. And lastly, in AI news, MIT researchers have announced Boltz-1, a fully open source model for predicting biomolecular structures.
Steve has been working through self-hosting, and some of it has worked really well, and some of it has had some, we'll call them minor hiccups. Now, I'm no stranger to trying to do open sourcey things, and as a part of doing that, sometimes we're trotting the road less traveled, and so we stumble into things that have not yet been pruned or cleaned up. So, Steve, you bumped into a couple of those things this week. We thought we'd take some time to highlight them.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue the conversation. If you're a regular listener, you've heard me talking about specifically about iPhone woes and trying to connect into various self-hosting things. And it seems to be cyclical. Like they'll work okay for some period of time and then something changes somewhere and then it kind of falls apart on me. And sometimes it's that my wife is too tolerant and then I only know about things because I happen to be looking over her shoulder and like, well, why didn't you tell me this? It's not that big of a deal. So for instance, is like one of the things we've been struggling with is Jellyfin playback on iOS. So there's 3 different apps that she was cycling between: SwiftFin, the official Jellyfin app, and one that currently escapes me. And they were all open source apps, and they all do different things related to Jellyfin. Like they all do the playback and stuff like that, but the problems seem to rotate between them. So I won't bore you with all of the details, but as a for instance, sometimes the Jellyfin app won't actually play the previous position. It'll tell you I've got a file and ask you if you want to start there, and then it starts at the beginning. So she'll open up another app and maybe it jumps to the right spot, but then if she tries to scrub a little bit, it goes back to the beginning. And so and the problem cycles across all 3 of these apps. And I didn't realize that we put a couple of them on just so that she could see, try them to see if she liked the interface better or whatever. And she's just cycling between them because she runs into a problem with this app. Well, I'll just pull up the other app. This is, not acceptable to me.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, it bothers me because this is the only place we have a problem. We've got Android set-top boxes and other Android devices and Linux computers and, all this sort of stuff. And none of them exhibit this problem except for the stupid iPhone.
Wait, I thought iPhone was going to be the thing that fixed everything.
Yeah, right. So we also have this ongoing problem with Nextcloud and PhotoSync. I like syncing photos. I want to be clear about that. We'll get to that in a minute. But I thought that I had solved this problem in the past because iOS has this thing. I think it's called Actions. I can't recall off the top of my head, but essentially there's some trigger and you can define actions that are taken on that trigger. So in this case, when she plugged her phone in, it would kill the Nextcloud app and then restart it and then force a sync. And the reason for this is because it seems to be very well documented that over time, the iOS device just kills the Nextcloud syncing in the background. And so Nextcloud thinks it's syncing, but it's not. And so for a time that was working. But then when we actually she specifically went to Nextcloud to share a photo with somebody and couldn't find it there, but could find it on her phone. And that was a big problem, like a big problem. Because this is also our photo backup. Like I rely on the fact that it shows up in Nextcloud because I have a whole pipeline of backup that assumes that the photos that we need to keep are in there. And so
but that assumes that it gets to Nextcloud.
Exactly. And that's a problem. And so I wanted to just continue this thread this week. We talked about these in the past, and I'm not going to go into big detail on all of that sort of stuff. But suffice it to say, we've been trying different apps, hoping that the applications are the problem. And I guess the early indications are that the open source apps on the iOS device are kind of part of the problem, and it's not the back end. So for photos, I know that everybody else is doing image and like blah, 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 but currently, and maybe this will change, but currently we don't have any particular interest in a photo management suite, right? Or Google Photo Replacement or whatever. So I didn't set that up. And again, because of my backup pipeline, already thinking that Nextcloud is going to be integrated in here, I didn't want to change anything. So there's an application called PhotoSync that you pay for that also has the ability to sync to WebDAV backends. This application is actually pretty nice overall because you can have it sync to Samba and FTP and various cloud, and you can define all of them, and you can tell it when to sync and all that kind of stuff. On Android, it's actually better than iOS. I was playing around with it. On Android, it actually will do things like, hey, you've taken a picture in Telegram. Do you want me to sync that too? Doesn't do that in iOS. I have no idea why. But anyways, it seems to be working. I'm going to be tracking this for a couple of months to see, because it looked like Nextcloud was also working, but we found that it was just missing pictures. So we're going to keep a really close tab on this, and I'll report back on that. For the sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead, do it, Jellyfin.
I was just going to say, for the Jellyfin thing, we ended up going with Infuse, and it had some initial problems with Jellyfin that I was able to sort around. So when you install Infuse and you hook it up to Jellyfin, it either installs or enables, I'm not sure which one, the Infuse plugin inside of Jellyfin, and like magic happens. And immediately it was doing what we needed it to do. She could jump to the place. She didn't have problems scrubbing through the video. Everything was nice, except that it wasn't syncing the watch status, which it was supposed to do. Long story short, I tracked it back to the fact that it installed an old version of the Infuse plugin for Jellyfin. So remove the old one, put the new one on. Everything seems to be happy. So far, it looks like paying for applications instead of let me rephrase that. Not going with the default open source applications seems to have alleviated some of our issues for now, but we'll report back. But it's been a real big headache supporting iOS.
So inquiring minds want to know, Steve, if you were to redo this, or if you ran into problems, how would you feel / where in the consideration list would be image? Would you ever consider using image to back up your wife's pictures, or is it no? We got too much invested in a process in Nextcloud. It's not just about getting the photos off the phone; it's the entire process that happens after that.
Well, it would have to be substantial. Like, she would have to really make use of it. I'm not going to particularly care. I'm fine. Just like you, we've talked about it.
Yes.
Noah plugs in his phone and clicks on all of them and copies them and pastes them or whatever similar type thing.
For 20 plus years, and it's worked every time.
Exactly. And I already store my pictures based on the year and the month, and I don't care what they're called. And so I know, I went and did this thing in April 2023, and I go there and I just click on the pictures and use the default Linux picture browser to just click through all the ones, to flip through all the ones. So I don't care. I don't care to type in, find all the pictures of dogs or, insert a thing. It's wonderful. I think it's flashy and neat. I wouldn't do it for myself. My wife would drive the demand. And if she said, yes, that's something that she'd be interested in, then sure, I'd go and look that up.
I'll tell you, Eric, are you an image guy at all?
No, in fact, I'm the Neanderthal that will scroll through his phone for 10 minutes trying to find a picture from 4 years ago.
No, you're in good company. We don't. Neither Steve or I are. We don't. Let's just say, if you sit around browsing through pictures and staring at albums, going, remember when? You probably don't hang out with us much. But really though. So potential if there's enough buy-in from the wife. I will tell you this. I am now an image user of going on 2 months or 3 months, and I will tell you, it's the best way I can describe it is the following. Did you ever, growing up, Steve, did you ever do like baseball cards or action figures or any sort of a collection where it wasn't necessarily about the toys themselves, but it was about the holistic picture of I'm growing the collection or I'm accomplishing something. Did you ever do anything like that?
Baseball cards.
You did. I'm sorry, it cut out there. You said you did do baseball cards?
Yeah, I had hockey and baseball.
Okay. So you might understand where I'm coming from with this then. So the way that I have, the way that image grabbed me, because again, I'm in your boat 100% all the way and twice on Sunday, insofar as I want the pictures. I don't want to destroy them. I want them. If I need them, like you, Steve, I'm going to go, well, you want the pictures from that time we went to San Francisco. Great. What year do we do that? Oh, we went in June of 2000. Okay, awesome. Let me go look. Ah, there they are. Here we go. Here's the picture you're looking for, whatever, right? And largely past that, there never once have I ever sat down and been like, geez, what should I do to pass the time? Let me think. I know. I'll click through pictures from 10 years ago. Never once happened. But here's what I didn't expect. So I set up image. I set the thing up and it starts dumping on my phone. So my image is off my phone. And so my original plan was I'm going to set the thing to dump all the photos off the phone and I just won't bother with anything that was in the past. And over time, what I've gravitated towards is getting all the photos that I had in the past into image because it turns into like this nice little collection. And oh, look at that. I can scroll back to this here and here's what happened there. And so what I'm saying is it's taken me further than I wanted to go and it kept me longer than I thought I wanted to stay there. So if you have feedback on what works for you, particularly if you're an iOS user, would you please let us know? live@asknoahshow.com. We'd love to hear from you. Past that, let's talk about Red Hat 10. With Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10 now in public beta this month, Michael Larbel from Phoronix has begun testing out the RHEL 10 beta on a few systems in his lab. In his first look at RHEL 10 performance, he's seeing how well RHEL 10 beta is performing relative to its RHEL 9.5 stable on an AMD EPYC server. So I think, Steve, have you had any professional experience with 10 yet, or is it still too early for your customers? I suppose your customers are probably at the very end of the line because they want it to be baked and ready to go, huh?
You know what? I only started to get customers that are like, our new VMs are RHEL 9.
So you're in my world overlap. Eric, being the marketing guy, you're the guy that's going to tell us everything is great and awesome, even if it's not ready and great and awesome. Of course, coming from Red Hat, it probably is. What have you heard about RHEL 10? What do you think?
Wow, you don't know me very well at all, sir.
You're telling me you'll give me the brutal honest truth?
I'll do both. So first off, here's the counterweight. This is beta. Do not install this in production. I shouldn't have to tell people this, but it happens. Do not install RHEL 10 in production. It is probably about 6 months away from GA. And things will change between now and then, like the kernel version or what version of Python is running all the things. So don't install this in production, please. I don't want to have to fly out there and take away your sysadmin card. That said, there's also an issue with I don't think you can convert from beta to 10.0. So it's not like install the beta. Okay, this was cool. Now I'm going to update to 10.0 GA. So please, the virtual machines are awesome. They're easy. And if you go to lab.redhat.com, shameless plug for my buddies over in the RHEL business unit, you can play with a RHEL 10 beta. So that's the caveat. Now the cool stuff, the part where I can get excited. RHEL 10, one of my favorite things right now is the fact that it is running Linux kernel 6.11, I believe, with with the expectation of jumping to 6.12 LTS. And the reason why I'm excited about that is over the last several major versions, the kernel version has seen a major version increase each time. So now with RHEL 10, we're actually looking at running a major and minor version that is very, 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 very close to Linus Torvalds' upstream GitHub repository. Anyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about, go try and run RHEL 7. The kernel, she's old. She's ready to retire. So far, there's not anything earth-shattering, nothing groundbreaking with RHEL 10. It's just an iterative improvement in RHEL 9, which was an iterative improvement over RHEL 8, which is when Red Hat switched to a 3-year cadence for RHEL major versions. So, 3 years ago, we were talking about the RHEL 9 beta, and actually that's when I started with the RHEL team. So I'm really excited to see what's coming with RHEL 10, and shameless plug for my buddies Nate and Scott and that team. If you go over to the RHEL YouTube channel after the first of the year, there's actually going to be a mini series on the RHEL YouTube channel about RHEL 10 and how to get started. So I actually moved off of that team about 3 months ago, so I'm excited to experience the beta firsthand instead of working on it.
So, because I know this comment is going to come in via email or chat or otherwise, tell me what the difference between RHEL beta and I'm using my air finger quotes here to try to elicit the reaction I'm looking for so that we can punt down all of the emails that are going to be coming in. Define for me the difference between the RHEL beta and the beta that is CentOS Stream.
Oh, please don't call CentOS Stream
I know.
a beta.
I phrased it that way intentionally. But tell me, but really, though, help me understand the difference.
So CentOS Stream is in and of itself a standalone distribution. It sits snugly in between Fedora Linux and RHEL, but it has its own use cases. CentOS Stream is great for working with Red Hat and with Red Hat partners to build the next thing. Like one of the most active, they're called special interest groups. These SIGs are vendors and developers from all over the world, all over different industries that are working towards a particular goal. For instance, there is a hyperscaler SIG, which is looking to make Linux run better in cloud environments so you can host other people's virtual machines. There's an automotive SIG. I think there's an AI SIG that's being stood up. CentOS Stream is a great place to get involved in the future of enterprise Linux. It is the only bridge between CentOS Stream 10 and the RHEL 10 beta is that RHEL 10 was snapshotted off of CentOS Stream 10.
Wow.
So that's the only bridge between those two. Right. CentOS Stream 10 is not intended to be a beta of any kind.
Where do people get the latest version of RHEL beta if they want to try it out?
I am so glad you asked. If you go out to console.redhat.com, create an account, you can sign up for a free developer account, and you can download RHEL for free. You can download the ISOs. You can use Image Builder, or if we had time, I would tell you about the beautifulness that is bootc.
Well, it just means you have to come back.
Hey, I'm down. Let's do it.
I appreciate you being here. We'll get you back soon. All right, music in your ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. You can catch this show every Tuesday. It's live at 6 p.m. Central. You can find the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com for the latest. Follow us on X. I'm at Colonel Linux. He's at Linux Ovens. The show at Ask Noah Show. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com.